Hello everyone, welcome to the YouTube channel, Explain IMO.
And we're your host. I'm voice number 1 from last video.
I'm voice number 2.
Today we're going to be looking at another assassin perspective, but this time it's going to be a 1 vs 1 fight, or more specifically, it's going to be a 1 vs 1 fight against a cleric. This video is taken from the perspective of Sai.
That would be me, and I'm facing a cleric whose name is actually Alea from Dreamweaver. Alea has an interesting tendency to use physical skills versus an assassin. And there are several reasons for this. Let's start. The main reason is that on this genie, there's Heart of Steel, which can basically block any magical damage is necessary. But Alea has a tendency to use physical damage, such as plume shots mainly. And since Heart of Steel can block any metal damage, the Sin here decided to use physical to lower the damage taken from otherwise what would be unblockable.
And this is a reasonable choice because clerics aren't really known for their ability to randomly charm bypass, so the Sin is more so going for preventing the cleric's DPS rather than being scared of the cleric's DPH.
And so what we just saw there is Maze stepping against Seal the God. Now, Seal of the God is a fairly tricky skill, lasts for 15 seconds, and it basically freezes you, seals you, and gives you damage immunity all at the same time. So the Sin used Maze steps there to block the movement part of it. And the reason there was because he wanted to avoid getting debuffed through Seal the God, which is very common. These anti-heal debuffs that are going on now are easier to avoid after waiting a bit because now he has faith and title.
Right, the anti-heal debuffs pretty much reduces your healing 1 point for 1 point. If you get stacked up to 10k, then your charm won't tick for 10k. And so it's really bad to have it stacked on you, and you would much rather avoid it than have it stacked on you and then have your charm tick. Because essentially, a full stack means your charm is not going to tick.
But luckily, because the Sin kited here, he was able to have Genie and title ready, which meant that the anti-heals weren't so lethal. At this point, he decided to spark, but Lat went into the air, which presented a bit of a problem. So now we're going to talk about airlocking, which is basically if you freeze someone that's falling through the air, like they're in the air but they don't have wings activated, then they basically can't do anything except use Genie or Apothecary.
Yes, and I think airlocking is a cheap strategy. Um, if I wouldn't do it because I feel it's an inherent glitch with the game. But I'm not gonna make any judgments as to what goes on in this video. But essentially, when you're airlocked, you are taking half damage because the game considers you to be on the ground. But at the same time, you're technically jumping, and the way this game is designed is that you can't attack when you're jumping, which means while you're airlocked, even though you do take half damage, you can't in any way use any of your skills. You can use Apothecary and you can use Genie, and that's it. And the problem when you're airlocked versus an assassin is that an assassin quite often has the damage to kill you despite airlocking you. Or if you're airlocked close enough to the ground, then even though you are in the air, if the assassin is on the ground, then you are taking full damage. So this is a really risky situation, and if the assassin wants to use airlock to his full advantage, then it's really recommended that you get out of it, because the assassin has the damage to kill you, and there's nothing you can do about it except Genie or Apoth.
And Sins are not the only class that can do this, even though they can do it effectively, really effectively, basically permanently with Sleep and Tackling Slash. The Cleric can also do this with Seal the God and then chaining into Dimensional Seal, which is basically a 20-second freeze or so. So now I'm in the same position where the Cleric can hit me for full damage, but I can't do anything at all except Genie or Apoth. And I'm in a very vulnerable position here, so I just decide to escape.
Which is why he had to use Faith, because if he didn't use Faith, then he could potentially die from that. Even though the Cleric isn't as effective as the Sin, it's better to use it than to risk it.
We just saw canceling a seal and using stun instead. So the thing with seal and stun is that they can be used interchangeably a lot. If someone is frozen and slept, if you seal them, they'll basically be stunned. If you stun them, they definitely will be stunned, but the effect is overall the same. And another thing that you may note is that people have a tendency to block either stun or seal a lot with Will Surge or Fortify. But by canceling Will Surge or canceling a stun or choosing to do something else that's not expected, you can make the opponent waste a genie skill, which is very useful because you didn't waste a control skill because you stopped in time, but they wasted something and they were tricked into doing so.
Yep, and that puts them in a really bad position because whereas before they probably could have used Faith and got out of it, but after they use Will Surge, they most likely won't have the Genie energy. So that puts you at an advantage as you just managed to get your control skill in, and they just wasted the Genie skill for nothing because they expected you to do something and you didn't. And that's a psychological aspect to this game, since the game is player versus player rather than just character versus character, which means it's not just about reaction time and pressing buttons.
It's also about predicting players. This doesn't have to be necessarily Sins as well with their Sun and their Seal. BMs can also do it. For example, when a BM is stun locking someone, they can either choose to use Smack, which is a temporary seal, or they can use Stun. And a lot of players will tend to fortify BM stuns, but what the BM can do is they can Smack, the person's still stun locked, but their Fortify was just wasted, so that's 55 energy gone, and their opponent is still stunned. Clerics can do the same thing as well. They can choose to either use Seal the God, which is blocked by Will Surge, or they can use their Sleep, which is blocked by Adrenaline Surge, which I don't have, but some people do. And by someone alternating these skills, they can either make it very hard for the opponent to predict what they're going to do, or they can just go ahead and waste all of their opponent's Genie.
So at this point, I just want to point out that Azox in the background says die to a sin was a bowl. Yeah.
It's okay, Azox. It's all
And
okay. It's okay.
a bit earlier, the Sin just waited for Meyer because someone else used Meyer on the Cleric, since there is a 1v1 going on in the background right now. Even though the Sin think it's perfectly okay to airlock someone, he doesn't want to attack someone when someone else mired him.
And you noticed I used triple spark as well as AD. This is not an optimal decision by any means, but it was an attempt to be optimal. Because the damage was so high, I decided to use triple spark to see if I could block enough of the damage that I wouldn't have to use Genie. That would have been great if it had actually worked, but since the damage was very high, higher than I expected, I did have to use both skills. So sometimes it is better to wait and see if you have to do anything at all, rather than just using all of your defenses at one point, because the less defenses you use, the more efficient you can be with your resources.
Triple sparking doesn't have to be used offensively. It can be used defensively. It can be used offensively and defensively at the same time. Some Sins prefer to use triple spark offensively, but when they do that, people generally think that's a bad idea. If you're non-Sins, they generally frown upon it. They call it a noob tactic. But tactically, it's also a waste of chi. If you just spam triple spark all day, then you can easily get locked through it, even with title protection up, or they can just kite you until your triple spark is off. So spamming triple spark all day isn't necessarily a good tactic either. But in this case, triple spark is being used defensively, which means that instead of using Genie to survive, he tried to use triple spark, and that resists the damage, which means he wouldn't have to use the Genie.
An upside of this is, even though I did make a mistake in predicting the damage, I was able to use triple spark offensively straight afterward. So even if I did make a mistake, I was still able to benefit from it. So just getting all of your resources to be used as best as possible, in the most efficient way possible. And that's going to be a lot of multi-purposing.
Alternatively, you could just kite to Africa. Depending on your player, it might not be a good idea, because what La tends to do is that when the opponent kites, he would switch to his minus channeling gear and get Chia off himself rather than chase.
Like, yeah, like just now. I could have used Heart of Steel, but I didn't because I noticed that that would be the last amount of genie that I had left, and my Apoth was used, and but I did have a lot of extra chi, so I just went with Triple Spark because I can generally conserve chi a lot better than conserving genie. That means that I had genie at the point where I'm most vulnerable. That is, no title, because I can use genie while controlled, but I can't use Triple Spark while controlled.
At this point, this cleric is using both Bash of Courage Genie, and he has Purify proc on his open, and that's a huge problem because you see several times in this fight, the Sin had a perfect setup, but the cleric gets a lucky Purify proc, and this cleric doesn't die, and he just Purify procs again. And I think that's a problem with Purify proc. It's that it's balanced, but it doesn't really take skill to use Purify proc.
Like, there's no timing involved, really. If it was a skill that said, you have this set cooldown and you can use it at this moment, then people who are skilled can time it more optimally than others who cannot. Whereas Purify proc just procs all day, regardless of the opponent.
To be honest, with Purify proc, the best tactic you got is really to just try and reduce the number of hits you do for any single combo, so that you can maximize your damage, but not so much on your attacks, which means minus interval with attacks per APS gears is a bad idea, and whenever you get the chance, you should always use debuffs whenever possible if you have the genie, so that you can kill them with less debuffs to prevent Purify from proccing. And pretty much you just have to try this until it works, because since have no direct counter to Purify proc, really only Seekers and BMs, they can only use it for 3 seconds, but really only Seekers have a direct counter to Purify proc.
And also, Badge of Courage here.
Right, and the thing with Badge of Courage is that its cooldowns is 30 seconds, which is exactly the cooldown of Headhunt. So every time you use Headhunt, the cleric can use Badge of Courage, and that's a perfect counter to it, because you won't ever have a time where your stun is cooldown, but their Badge of Courage isn't, unless you chain your stuns.
A seal combo is generally you're gonna have to do it a lot more than a headhunt combo. It's easier to set up, but it's more likely to fail. Some other options include one-shotting the cleric, which is kind of cheap, which is why the Sin didn't really go for one-shots that much. And also some genies. For example, this cleric had 93 dexterity on genie, which basically meant that they had a 15% chance for Badge of Courage to fail. So basically, if the Sin just used the stun combo, say 10 times, there are 1 or 2 points in the fight where Badge of Courage would have not gone off.
Right. And what's done in this fight was that our Sin here attempted to chain his stun. He did it several times in the video, but most of the times he got Purify procced instead. But the Sin pretty much did Telestun and tricked the cleric into using Badge of Courage, and then followed it up with a headhunt, and that ended the fight. So that's the end of the video. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, leave a like, leave a comment, and tell us how we did, what you liked, what you didn't like. Subscribe to us for more videos, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you.